So in this few slides of the PowerPoint, I'm going to show you how David Beckham's representation has been constructed using mediation and, to a certain extent, the constructionist view of representation. Now we have to consider that the media text is this PowerPoint slide. And clearly the representation has been mediated through selection, organisation and focus. And in this instance, there are several encoders. One of them is me. This is my media text. I've created the slide and I've chosen to include 3 different images. The other encoders are obviously the photographers that took the photos. Now in this case, there has been selection, organisation and focus. The selection process was me choosing 3 images of David Beckham from the millions and millions and millions that exist on Google Images and other places. Organisation, well, I've just put them pretty randomly onto the slide here, so there's not much that's significant about the organisation. But if you look at the images, there is a clear focus. The focus is on David Beckham as England captain. Obviously, of the millions of images I could have chosen, David Beckham in other football shirts, in his own clothes, but I've chosen to represent David Beckham as a leader, as someone who's very successful, as someone who is iconic, someone who is British, and also someone who's hugely popular. Now there are various things about the photos that suggest this, that represent Beckham in this way. You look at the foreground and background of the top left photograph, and you can see the St George's flag slightly out of focus, but certainly very prominent. If you look at the right-hand photograph at the bottom or in the centre, you see David Beckham's facial expression. He looks passionate, he looks elated by the fact that he's just probably scored a goal. And so there are certain ways in which David Beckham is representing himself through his facial expression, through his gesture and through his posture, perhaps most prominently in the bottom left, where he looks like he's again just scored a goal, but almost creating an iconic Christ-like pose. The ways in which the encoders or the photographers have represented him is clearly as a man who is iconic, someone who is more important than anyone else on the pitch, as he is photographed alone as the images have been cropped. So all of these things contribute to the constructionist view of representation. We're likely to take the preferred reading if we're England fans, if we're fans of David Beckham. We may take an oppositional reading if we don't like the man. If we think about the ideologies that are dominant in our society and how they contribute to this, we can think of things like football being such a key part of British society. Maybe patriotism isn't so important to us. However, generally, in times of sporting activities where the nation is represented, we generally get behind people. The representation does change when we add an image like this. Rather than just being this heroic, iconic figure, this image actually adds a degree of fallibility to David Beckham's representation. He somehow seems more human to us. But of course, it adds to this emotional representation that's already signified by the now bottom middle image. If we swap these images, then we get a completely different representation of David Beckham. Now we see him as the family man. We see him as caring and loving as a father and as a husband. Added to the photo on the right-hand side, it now gives him a more human quality. Less of the untouchable superstar. He seems maybe like just one of us, out of his football shirt and into kind of normal clothes. If we swap these, his representation changes dramatically. While we keep the father figure image there and the image of Beckham with his head in his hands, we now see David Beckham as a liar, a cheat, a cad. If we consider the bottom left image, which is clearly a photograph from an advertisement, he seems image obsessed, vain, maybe even arrogant. These all again feed into the ideologies of our society. We reject those who are bad fathers, are bad husbands. And as a consequence, David Beckham's representation goes from one of being a superstar to someone who is seen as an enemy of the people. But what hopefully all this proves is that really it doesn't matter what we think we know or don't know about Beckham. He's not a person. For us, he's a media text. He is a text that's mediated through the images that are presented of him, and as such we can only analyse his representation rather than talking about him as a person.